good afternoon, and good evening. Magandang umaga, magandang tanghali, magandang hapon at magandang gabi sa inyong lahat na nakikinig at nanonood sa atin. Welcome to your hour, and this is Rita Gadi. Bago po tayo magsimula, nais ko lang paalala na tayo ay live sa kasalukuyan. Maaari po kayong mag-share and subscribe dito sa tinatawag nating KDP channel, Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino, KDP channel sa ating Facebook o sa YouTube. Napapanood po tayong live at kahit na anong oras sa araw, pwede rin po niyong mapanood sapagkat andyan na yan. Naka-post na yan dyan. Facebook and YouTube, KDP channel. K as in Kilimanjaro. D as in Denmark, P as in Pilipinas. So yun na siguro. At alam naman ninyo kung ano yung KDP na yan sapagkat mahabang panahon na at ilang taon na natin pinag-uusapan yan. At dito rin sa ating programang Rita Gadi Hour, madalas din natin makasama ang mga ibang mga miyembro ng ating KDP. Simula na sa ating presidente, si Sir Butch Valdez. At marami din na sa atin ay iba't iba na ring mga larangan ang kanilang pinasukan, ngunit sila ay kasama pa rin natin sa KDP. Today is the 30th of November, and here in our country, in the Philippines, November 30 has been declared as a Day of Heroes. Andres Bonifacio Day, ang sabi nga, sapagkat siya ang kinikilalang revolutionist, leader ng ating Philippine Revolution 1896 hanggang 1898. Napakaikli, 2 taon pa lang. Ngunit matagal itong pinaplano at matagal din itong umuusbong sa iba't ibang lugar ng Pilipinas. As a matter of fact, one of the longest revolutions that was ongoing even after Andres Bonifacio was killed was the one in Bohol, for instance. And of course, when we try to remember today the many heroes that we have had in the revolution, and then we try to look for heroes afterwards, and that was how long ago? 158 years ago. Since the birth of Andres Bonifacio. He was born in July and then he died in May 10. But we celebrate November 30 as his anniversary date because that is where he was born in Tondo, one of the boroughs of Tondo in Manila. And you know, at that time, nung siya ay pinanganak, ang Tondo ay nasa labas ng Intramuros sapagkat yan ang mga commercial establishments ng mga inchik. Sila ay diyan sila nakatira at banda roon nga ay makikita natin na maraming tao ang talagang kasama nila doon sa labas ng Intramuros. Ngunit kasapi ito sa Maynila na tinatawag nga. And that was Andres Bonifacio. We are commemorating 158 years of what he started and what we know today as the Philippine Revolution. The title of our program is Searching for Heroes. Bakit nga ba? Why are we searching for heroes? Anyway, I always go back to a mythologist, one of my favorite mythologists. Ang mitolohiya kasi diyan natin nakikita at nababasa kung ano yung mga naganap na noong nakaraan, ngunit paikot-ikot pa rin sa ating buhay sa kasalukuyan, sapagkat yan ay kasapi na ng mga kasaysayan natin. Mythology is something that weaves in and out of our lives in many ways. And here I would go back to Joseph Campbell, as I've said, one of my favorite mythologists. He has a chapter in his book, The Story of Mythology, and one of his chapters is The Hero's Adventure, and I'd like to read that particular introduction he has. And I quote this. Furthermore, we have not even to risk the adventure alone, for the heroes of all time has gone before us. The labyrinth is thoroughly known, and we have only to follow the thread of the hero path, and where we had thought to find an abomination, we shall find a god. And where we had thought to slay another, we shall only slay ourselves. Where we had thought to travel outward, we will come to the center of our own existence. And where we had thought to be alone, we will be with all the world. That was the introduction of Joseph Campbell in the chapter where he's discussing the adventure of the hero. And also in this chapter, he has a conversation with Bill Moyers. In fact, they have Bill Moyers has a book on several interviews he's had with Joseph Campbell. But in this particular chapter, there is a question and answer that is ongoing between Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell. So those of you who may be interested to read further on mythology, because he has several books and also several volumes on the different kinds of mythologies, Western, Occidental, Oriental, and the contemporary mythologies that we still commemorate or that we still acknowledge up to this day. So here he says that because heroes are worth writing for, when you read a book, for instance, a novel, or when you watch a movie, you always try to find out where is the hero? Sino bang bida dyan? And then you have the anti-hero. Sino ba yung adversarial, yung kalaban ng hero? But always there is that particular, that particular aspect in the things that we read, in the books that we read, in the movies that we watch on television. Every time there is a narrative or a story, we look for the hero and we follow the hero's path. And that's exactly what Joseph Campbell was saying. There's a lot of writing that has been done or, has been commemorating the hero itself. And so we find this in popular novels, and the main character is always a hero or a heroine, pwedeng babae, pwedeng lalaki, na, there is always something that the hero or the heroine does that makes him or her perform beyond the normal range of achievement and experience. And that is why, precisely, as we said, that is what a hero is supposed to be. So here we are in search of a hero, and Joseph Campbell describes a hero quite briefly. A hero is someone who has given his or her life to something bigger than oneself. Giving his or her life to something bigger than oneself. So when we look at all the other cultures in the world and try to find out exactly what the hero in these cultures would be carrying, or what that hero would be espousing, well, this is what the author says. No, there are two types of deed that the hero does. One is the physical deed, in which the hero performs a courageous act, either in battle or the hero saves a life or saves many lives. The other kind of deed is the spiritual deed, in which the hero learns to experience the supernormal range of human spiritual life and then comes back to the people with a message. So yan ang dalawang bagay na yan na dinidescribe niya as the path of the hero. So the usual hero adventure begins with someone from whom something has been taken, or who feels that there is something lacking in the normal experiences available or permitted to the members of his society. So that is where the hero stands out. There is something lacking. There was something taken away from him. There is something that he would want to do for the community or the society that he or she lives in. And so the person then faces off, a series of adventures beyond the ordinary, either to recover what has been lost or to discover some life-giving elixir, a life-giving potion, a life-giving, element that could be able to save the community or that society. And it's usually a cycle of going out of that society and then returning. So that is how it was described. So you could see that the structure and something of the spiritual sense of the adventure is actually something that we already anticipate in many ways. Kaya pag pinapag-usapan natin in search of a hero, we have to look at the background, at the past experiences and episodes of his or her life to determine how that person is able to go beyond the ordinary with an extraordinary episode in his life to serve or to give something to the community, to make it better or to save it from some malady or whatever else is confusing or is actually darkening their lives, and that is where the hero comes in. So we also have, there is a description also of both the male hero and the female hero, and in many times you can see that that particular description is actually what it is, that the hero is a person who gives something beyond himself or herself. So it is a cause that is greater than oneself. It is a cause for the community. It is a cause for a society. It is a cause for saving lives. It is a cause for saving even the mental attitude of people and so forth. So it really is an outstanding kind of act. And sometimes after we have talked about the Philippine Revolution and all of the gallant men and women that lived through the Katipunan at the time, and several of the battles that they waged against Spain. Remember, we were colonized for how long? For about 400 plus years. And the simmering actually of the anger of the people, of the natives, precisely was that they had to get themselves to stand up and revolt. That's why when you ask the question, what makes a revolutionist? So that's exactly how we could describe the men and women of that time, who felt that it was really already, the kind of experience that they will have to go through to be able to fight the colonizers, and that was Spain. And we know how it happened that Andres Bonifacio, together with several others, formed the Katipunan. And there you could see that KKK nga yung kanilang symbol, and they even had a pledge of loyalty and an oath that they would pledge to the movement. Then you had also the writers, the intellectuals, the elite, intellectual elite that went abroad and were exposed to the idea of revolutions and all of this idea of how a people can fight for their rights, especially if they're colonized or especially if they're enslaved. So we have seen the propaganda movement, for instance, Jose Rizal and the rest of the other writers with him, and together with the others, also Apolinario Mabini and all the rest. I will not be mentioning all of them now. There are so many of them. But whenever we think of those people at that time, that was a period indeed that we are commemorating today. That was the day of heroes that we are celebrating in a way. But how much of it do we really remember? So you see how it is that today, for instance, we are in the midst of a political, I don't know how you would describe this, a political circus, a political carnival, a political whatever. But it is the way we are. Every time we have national elections, we go through this it's like a fiesta in a way. It is like an entertainment for us, but it is something more serious than just that, especially now, because we have seen the progress and the evolution of politics in our country from the time that we gained our independence from the United States of America in 1946. Prior to that, we also had already a constitution, the Malolos Constitution, early on. We already had the system of laws and the system of governance, which our own people were actually the ones administering government. But through all these years, and after so many presidents and several administrations, we seem to be on a roller coaster ride. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad, but we are not able to have this continuity, like a plateau wherein perhaps from there we could evolve into what the ideal would be as far as a democratic way of life is concerned. And so we go through this exercise, a national exercise of suffrage, the vote, which is so important as far as the government of our people are concerned. But also it is a time when, well, some kind of a happy event in a way. But 2022 May, which is about 168 or so days from today, we are going to enter in what some people have described as a benchmark in our political life, in contemporary politics, because there are so many things that have happened which are not of the usual traditional kind of political events that we have had in the past. For one, we have the mushrooming of so many political parties, and you know how this has brought about not only a difference in loyalties, but also a confusion as far as the people are concerned. Plus the fact that the political parties do not seem to have something that is more permanent, that they stand for certain principles, for certain values, for a certain vision, for a certain ideal, so that the members of that political party can stand strongly against the onslaught of opposition against them. Time was when we only had two political parties, and that seemed to be simplifying the way people would vote, the way people would choose the people that they would be electing into office. So sabi nga, there was a saying that hindi pa nga pinapanganak, meron ng political party yung bata. In other words, children inherited in a way the political parties of their parents, but that was then. You only had these two political parties, the Nacionalista and the Liberal Party. And they stood for certain principles which they believed in and which they fought for and which they defended. So there you have sometimes a change in political parties when another administration comes in, and then you have the other one opposing whatever it is that they do not agree with. But that was how it was. As I've said, it simplified the choices of the candidate of the people, voters like us, for instance. Either your parents or your grandparents were belonging to a political party, and you would tend to believe exactly how your parents stood for this. But what happened was, in time, with certain laws that were passed and with certain changes that were made, there were several other political parties that were being established, and sometimes it is a breakaway from the original Nacionalista or the Liberal, and so they had different names. Nowadays, the confusion is even worse because now you have so many names. And to add to this, you also have the party list, which also should have been able to clarify what is meant by the marginalized. Apparently, it is no longer just representing the marginalized because you are one of them, but you are representing the marginalized because you just want to win a seat in Congress. So that's another matter. Congress too has expanded its membership. Time was when we only had about less than 100. Now we have something like 340 members of Congress. The Senate still has 24 members, but then combining both members of the legislative branch of government, how many do you have? You have close to 400 of this that are supposed to be making our laws. You see, so when you look at it now, do we need more laws? That you have 400 people, 400 men and women that will be elected there so that they can write more laws. How many times have we advocated for the indexing of these laws, the codifying of all of these laws? In other words, finding out, baka meron na dyan na kailangan amyendahan, meron kailangan dyan na napakaluma na, maybe the 1940s and 1950s, which need to be rescinded or thrown out altogether. Some laws will have to be strengthened if you need certain provisions because of the passage of time and of experience. But be that as it may, that's exactly how our politics is going. But let's get back now to the topic of the day, which is actually the search for heroes. But why are we looking for heroes as far as our politicians are concerned? Should we not? Or should we? Are we expecting very much of those that we elect into office? Remember what the Constitution says. It is a very minor, not minor, it is a simple kind of definition for qualifications to be elected into office. For the highest seat of the land, for instance, you only have to be a Filipino citizen. You have to be in residence in the Philippines for at least 10 years prior to your being elected into the office that you're claiming. You have to be well, of course, read and write, etc., and all of this. You have to be a certain age. I think it is 40 years old or so. But so you could see that it's very stringent compared to the kind of qualifications needed if you want to be an ordinary government employee. You have to pass the civil service examination. And that in itself is already something which is rather strenuous and tedious and quite exacting. So you could see the disparity of qualifications. But be that as it may, they say, or at least the framers of the Constitution that wrote this claim that anybody can be president. And that's exactly what is happening. every time there is an election. For this particular election that we're going to have in May of next year, we have something like 97 originally filing for the office of, excuse me, of the presidency. Excuse me. Am I choking on these words? Yes, I am. 97 candidates. I think the Commission on Elections has already narrowed this down. Excuse me again. And sorted out only those that are really qualified to run for that office. So you have all of these candidates now, and they are presented or they present themselves as best as they can, although the campaign period begins only by February 8 next year. But already, as soon as they have filed their certificates of candidacy for the presidency, you could already see some snippets of their advertisements. You have all of the video that is coming out on social networking. This is actually the best method that they can find as of now that can be utilized. And then, of course, you have all of the different commentators on radio, on television, and on print talking about all of these candidates. So as of now, we have all of them lining up for that particular position. And here we are, the voter, looking at them. And here I am on this day searching for heroes. But then again, we have to really distinguish. Are we just looking for heroes? Or should we just be looking for a leader, somebody that could lead us to a better quality of life? All of them speak of this, the alleviation of how to alleviate the poor, how to be able to remove the poverty line so that we have better people, we have more people arriving at middle class or even a higher class and just being endlessly poor. But then again, there are so many of these platitudes sometimes that every election, that is what confuses us. All of them have this grandmother statement, so to speak, all about removing corruption, about instituting peace and order, all about, well, all of you hear this quite often. And every election time, they are being revived, as a matter of fact. So again, we are asking, should we look for a hero in any of these people? Or should we look for just a leader? Well, a lot of people will agree perhaps that we just need somebody who is good and who could lead us, somebody who has a moral standing that we are aware of, so that he or she does not fall into the temptations that is there for the seat of power. Power, of course, as they say, corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what is it in the offices that these people are running for that could be able to determine whether they have the character of a hero, to offer themselves for a cause that is greater than themselves? Offer themselves for a cause that is greater than themselves. Meron bang ganun? Anyway, so we go back and forth with questions such as this, and we ask ourselves, ano ba talaga ang meron? And so we go back again to what we're commemorating today, Andres Bonifacio and the Philippine Revolution. And at the time, there was the tragedy of the revolution, as they say, which was how Andres Bonifacio was killed on his way from supposedly a trial, because he was suspected of wanting to be the president of the republic when all he wanted to be was the head of the national defense, because he was the one actually who already had the mixture of people who could carry arms and who could fight, perhaps not really as well trained that they should be, but they were willing to die for that particular cause, which is to be able to fight the Spaniards and all of the weaponry that they had, which we did not have at the time. And so you had, for instance, the first act of the revolt in many ways was already the formation of the Katipunan, kataas-taasang kagalang-galang na Katipunan. It was originally a secret kind, a clandestine secret kind of a membership that you had in that particular movement. But then, of course, talagang meron leakage. I mean, a lot of people talk about it, even though it's hush-hush. And of course, the Spaniards are very aware that there are people that are actually moving already as far as challenging their imperial government in the country. And so you had Andres Bonifacio, and you had the tearing of the cedula. The cedula is some kind of a residence certificate You know how ornately written it is, actually. We have copies of that up to this day, and you could see how in handwriting, in cursory writing, you could see how you become actually a subject of the Spanish government. And so to be able to declare that the Filipinos now are revolting against the Spanish government, they tore their cedula. And then you have, of course, the meeting that they had in Biak na Bato, where they had all of this, the final meeting, actually. I must have talked about this many times in the past. These are the 5 important days of August leading on to the assault on the Polvorin here in San Juan. San Juan del Monte, which is San Juan City now in Metro Manila, is where the Polvorin, where the armory of the Spaniards were kept. And that was very well guarded. And that was the target of the troop of Andres Bonifacio, young men that joined him, 17, 18, 16, 15 years old, very young. Even at the time, I think Andres Bonifacio was, how young was he? Not even quite 30 or thereabouts. He started all of this and he was just 28 anyway. So the Polvorin would have been attacked, and that would signal already the start of that revolution prior to, not prior to, but after the tearing of the cedula and after the pact in Biak na Bato, parang pagbibiyak ng bato, whatever you would call that pact that they had there, that they would already shed a drop of their blood on the oath that they have taken for the Katipunan and for the revolution itself. So the first assault was here in San Juan, the Polvorin, and how honorably it was commemorated today by the president himself, President Rodrigo Roa Duterte, who came here to San Juan to honor this day, the commemoration of the Day of Heroes here in San Juan, where you had the first attack of the Philippine Revolution here, the attack on the Polvorin. And he also opened what is known as the tunnel, the water tunnel that was leading from San Juan all the way. I think this is all the way up to Montalban. I don't know if they're able to push through with that, but kasya din ng mga jeep, actually, yung mga sasakyan ng unang panahon, kasyang dumaan dyan, but that was supposed to be the water system. And our mayor now, Mayor Zamora, has been able to restore this, although this is actually a work in progress of several years already. But finally now it was opened with President Rodrigo Roa Duterte honoring San Juan itself in memory of the first attack on the by the Filipinos, by the revolutionists against the Spanish armory, and the opening of that particular tunnel, water tunnel, which was not just a water tunnel, but which would connect the revolution, supposedly the revolution is from one end of San Juan all the way up to the hills of Montalban or thereabouts anyway. I am trying to lead on to this opening as though I knew exactly where it was leading to, but as I've said, we have seen the rites that were commemorated early this morning with the president in attendance. So what was it that they did here? They attacked this Spanish armory, but of course with the sophisticated weapons that the Spaniards had at the time, talagang natalo yung mga revolutionists. But that triggered now the entire movement of the Philippine Revolution, where you have the 8 provinces that had joined in. You had Pampanga, Tarlac, Cavite, Batangas, Laguna, Nueva Ecija, Bulacan, and of course Manila. Here in what happened in several of the barrios and towns here in Manila. So the 8 provinces, which is symbolized by the 8 rays of the flag in our Philippine flag, that actually began the spread of the Philippine Revolution in these places, and together with what was happening also in Ilocos and what was happening in Bohol, in the Visayas, in Iloilo, and all over, as far as what could be reached at the time. Wala pang mobile phone, there was no way of communication, no telegram, so it was really just spread out. As a matter of fact, Bonifacio was triggered to attack the Polvorin when he learned already that Jose Rizal was executed in Bagumbayan. So you could see how long it took for the news to travel from one end of the movement to the other. And then of course you had the wife of Andres Bonifacio, Gregoria de Jesus, who was known her nom de guerre was Lakan Bini, the first lady of the revolution, or the noble woman, as you would call it, Lakan na Binibini, after which Malacanang also is known as where a noble lives. So that is how the nom de guerre of Gregoria de Jesus, the partner in the revolution of Andres Bonifacio. So Andres Bonifacio was tried because he was suspected. There was some kind of a mock trial. Adrian Cristobal has written about it extensively in the book, The Tragedy of the Revolution, precisely is the killing of Andres Bonifacio, because right after the trial, he was supposed to be transferred, brought somewhere, but as they were traveling through the hills of Maragondon, he was shot by, two of his jailers, or those who were supposed to be bringing them to another celda, and he was shot there together with his brother Procopio. I would just like to read what Adrian Cristobal wrote about this, because then this is still one of those debates in history, but we are at least confirmed by the fact that Andres Bonifacio was shot together with his brother in the hills of Maragondon on May 10, as they were being transferred after the mock trial in Cavite for another prison cell. But then there was an order already that was given by Emilio Aguinaldo that, for the execution of Andres Bonifacio up there in the hills. So it was not a misunderstanding or a mistake. It was not, it was not necessary for the life of the revolution. It was an inevitable unfolding of a historical process. It was a crime. Even if historical time, it was decreed that there were no criminals, it was still a crime. This is the writing of Adrian Cristobal in his book, The Tragedy of the Revolution. Some would counsel burying the tragedy to the past where it belongs, but history is about remembering. History is not about forgetting. In writing this book, Adrian intended to keep the memory of the hero, Andres Bonifacio, our own tragedy, alive. For there are lessons to be learned from this particular episode. He did not intend that we reconstitute ourselves into factions, as did at the time you have the Magdiwang and then you have the Magdalo factions, but rather to recognize our unity as a people. The retribution of the crime committed against our authentic hero probably had come about without our knowing it. In any case, 100 years, now 158 years, should render it almost impossible. The burden of history remains with us, the living, and above all, on the descendants of the players at the time, whatever their roles in that historical drama. If they can learn to forgive one another, then we as a people must learn to forgive ourselves. And never again, we pray, should we betray one another. So in summary, that was the tragedy of the revolution. The betrayal from within the ranks of the Magdiwang, the Magdalo, Emilio Aguinaldo, Andres Bonifacio, and the rest of all of those who belong from one party or one group and the other belonging to another group. How is it today, as I was explaining quite briefly? When time was, we only had two political parties, but today we have so many of them that we could hardly distinguish which party is the better one, or at least answerable to many of the needs and requirements and demands and ideals and dreams of the people. That is precisely why we are still searching for heroes, not just leaders, but heroes, persons who would be able to give themselves for a cause greater than themselves. As it is, everything seems to be personal. It is because sasabihin ng isa, kailangan kasi ganitong gagawin ko kasi yung isa tumatakbo, kailangan labanan kasi ayaw ko yung kanyang pinanindigan. The other one would dream of another kind of a society where lahat ng tao kailangan bigyan ng ganito, bigyan ng bahay, bigyan ng whatever. So all of them come up with all of these statements. But are these causes greater than themselves, or they're just merely words that are actually floating out there? But how can we choose people simply by the words they say? That is where we look deeper into their lives. Kaya nga sinasabi natin, where we could find an abomination, perhaps there we can find a God. So yun ang ating hinahanap. Where can there be the ideal in all of this that are now presented to us? But I'm not speaking only of the office of the presidency. I'm also speaking of what? Of 400 who want to enter the legislative branch of government. And then I'm talking about 81 governors of the different provinces of our country. I'm talking about 1,450 mayors and their boards, either their city boards or their municipal boards. So you can imagine all of this men and women that are now presenting themselves to the people to be voted upon. They will be in the seat of governance. And from there, we can hopefully be able to sort out as we go into the precinct, as we write down our ballots, as we shade those circles, whatever it is that the ballot would look like now. So it is there that we are confronted with who are these people that we are going to put in office that will be governing us. Time was when, when the system of laws and the system of men was debated upon in Rome and in Greece, until you had the blending of both the philosophers of Greece and the practicality of the Romans, so that you had the ideal of what is known now as democratus, the rule of the majority. At the time, you also had the conflict of interest, the conflict of personalities. You have seen the conflict between Pompey and Caesar, and how Caesar was assassinated at the Senate, on the Senate floor, even by his closest friend, Brutus and Cassius. And then you had the people agreeing to that kind of an assassination because Caesar was quite ambitious. And so then you had, well, of course, Shakespeare spoke about this in a better way than the way we observe it. But he already spoke of what was really the feeling of the people at the time, while they agreed that you had to eliminate those who were overly ambitious, but then you also had to understand why they were such, because they wanted to save the republic. So, as we said, these were the origins or the roots from which we inherited many of the things that we observe today. The codification of the laws by Justinian and all of this that we follow today, the civil code of what we also inherited from Spain. And then, of course, the ideals of justice, freedom, and democracy that we inherited and was handed on to us by America, which was our colonizer for about 45 years immediately after Spain. And so you could see that in the flux and in the tempers of the times, we actually absorb or we throw away certain ideals and certain beliefs, the way we perform our own governance and our way of life. And so why are we still searching for heroes? Again, as we said, what we see are abominations, but what we're searching for is a God in the sense that he or she is already in the platform of an ideal. That there is something in the character of the person which reflects not just himself or herself, but which reflects the very needs and the very demands and the dreams of the people that he or she intends to serve. And so it goes that, I was trying to list down, because then again, this is really quite a long list, but I'll have to read it so that those of you who are listening to us or probably watching us even, and then those of you later on who would tune in, as I've said, we are now on YouTube and Facebook and other social networking avenues where you could watch this program and other programs of the KDP. All you have to do is post, you just have to tag in KDP. Well, this is your hour, Rita Gadi's hour. And then, of course, there are other programs also of the KDP. But as I was saying, many of us are sometimes, not sometimes, but often, we are attracted by either facial features, name recall, some gimmicks that candidates have. And we retain this in a way, superficial as it may be, but we retain it. And sometimes we do not really get into the innermost essence of what the person is or what that person has in mind that has connection with us. And that is where the political bond between the people and the governed is very important. And that is the kind of bond that we ourselves create when we execute our ballot. That is precisely what we do. We sign our destiny. We sign our future. We mark the paper with our own handwriting. And so when we complain later on, that's exactly what Barack Obama said at one time. You keep on complaining about your government, but you put us here in office. So before we start complaining later on, we have 168 days before we mark our signature, indelible as it should be. Then we have to consider now the choices that we're going to make before we suffer the consequences. How did they say it in French? Après moi le déluge, after me the deluge. Oh my goodness, let it not happen. After me is also after us, the voter. So after we have affixed our choices, then the deluge comes. Or will it be an elevation into the ideal, into a better kind of life, a better kind of thinking, a better kind of system? Oh my goodness. So as I've said, I took the liberty of listing down what I would want to say as the considerations that we have to take into account when we go into the ballot. And this is really for everyone. This is not just for the intellectuals or those who are, for those who have college education. Lahat ito, this is for everyone. We have to think about these things, especially now, before we get into the ballot, and we get into the precinct. So when we are considering priorities, and there are many of these priorities, but I would consider that all of this are priorities. And how many are these? Oh my goodness. Let me just read it as fast as I can. So, agricultural modernization and rural development. This is where your food comes from, the food that goes to your table. So agriculture modernization is important because we still have antiquated ways of planting and fishing and so forth. So we have to have a modernization of agriculture. It's not being done right now, but will there be a continuity of this? Anti-corruption, transparency, and social accountability. Oh my goodness. All of the candidates talk about this, but if you look at their background and if you look at what they have done in the past, are they really for this? Are they for anti-corruption, transparency, and social accountability? Climate change mitigation and adaptation. We just had the last of this COP26 in Glasgow, in Scotland. And you had all the promises that were made even in Paris and in Tokyo for all of these summits on climate change. But has it been followed? Now they're extending the deadlines for all of the things that they're supposed to do for 2035. That was supposed to have been 2000 and then 2012 and then 2000 so forth. But now it's 2021 and they had the summit again of 100 or so representatives of countries there in Scotland, and still another promise for 2035. So that's another aspect, development priority that our candidate should look into. Climate change mitigation and adaptation. Disaster risk reduction and management. These are important because we have 24 typhoons regularly every year. So you can imagine that is just one of the natural disasters that we suffer. Then we have volcanoes erupting, then we have earthquakes, and we have floods, then we have rivers overflowing, and then we have many other things besides, which is actually now covered by disaster risk reduction and management. Of course, this is already a general statement. Economic growth, that is the first thing that will actually be on the table of anybody who wants to run our government by 2022, after May 2022, by June of 2022. Then you have education, which is providing quality education for children. For children, that is so important, the primary level, because that is where the tabula rasa of their minds is actually going to absorb everything that you put in it, and that is there for the rest of their lives. So again, we have to look into the education of our children. Energy. improving power sources, renewable and clean energy. What has happened to the nuclear plant? I was already mentioning this in the past, that we had the nuclear plant installed together with the nuclear plant in Korea, in South Korea. Magkasabayan, Westinghouse ang gumawa. Because I interviewed some of the lawyers and some of the engineers of Westinghouse in Pennsylvania when they had the hearing on this. And, they were saying that it's the same structure that they had in South Korea and the one that they also installed here in Bataan. So ano nangyari sa South Korea? My goodness, it has progressed so fast and so well and so in such a magnitude. And they now have how many nuclear plants? 7, 8, 9 in South Korea. Tayo yung isa hindi pa natin napapaandar. Can you imagine? We speak of energy. And here we are with a nuclear plant that could be reducing our cost of energy by 50%. And it is non-toxic. It is clean energy anyway. I could invite an engineer to discuss this. Then we speak of the environment also, that is already part of climate change. Food security, which is the improvement of our access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. I was just listening to Senator Amy Marcos in Ilocos, and she was talking about the importance of what it was then when we had the Kadiwa stores, when we had the movement coming from the farms to your table. Nawala na yung mga middlemen, yung mga nasa gitna na ang dami-daming dinadaanan, which adds to the price of the product, and also which does not help the farmer that is actually producing the product. So here we have to go back to what it was then and perhaps continue this, because it worked then when we had these Kadiwa stores. And then of course we had foreign direct investments. That's also very important for us. Again, how can we attract foreign direct investments? We already have the infrastructure of roads, but we don't have the infrastructure of the internet, of the accessibility to the web, to what it's actually going to be in the future. All of these virtual discussions and all of these Zoom meetings that are exactly what I'm doing now, you see. So it is the connectivity that we should have. Fiber optics, is it, or something else, or satellite? But we should have this already now, and it should be progressing as the future unfolds every day. Then we have, this is the information and communication technology that I'm talking about. And of course, the delivery of health services. How many times have we advocated for tertiary hospitals to be built, at least in every region? How many regions do we have? 15 tertiary hospitals. If we could build 81 per province, that would even be a bonus already for the rest of our country. And then you have land reform, I think, needs revision likewise. You give 7 hectares or 3 hectares or 2 hectares to one farmer, and they produce for themselves, for their families. How about for their livelihood and for their own method of living, of earning a decent living? Job creation is also one of those elements that we have to consider. Of course, a lot of our candidates would say, Magpapa, how will we have greater job creation? Again, this is the nitty-gritty of it. And then, of course, law and justice. We have to improve our system of justice. You have 70 people in jail that's still waiting to be indicted. My goodness, you should have deadlines. 3 months, and that case should be solved already. Otherwise, you suspend the judge, or you lessen all of these postponements for all kinds of reasons. Maybe certain cases should not have postponements anymore. Again, but we have recently now a 5-year program, which was initiated by the Supreme Court Chief Justice himself. Chief Justice Asmundo was saying that there is this 5-year program that he has already installed for the judiciary to improve itself and to be able to be relevant to the needs of the times, especially our people, and also the use of technology when it comes to the administration of justice. Then we have population. Oh my goodness. Population has been population reduction, population control, however else you call it, whatever name you have it. You have an RH bill, which was there for 20 years before it was finally approved. But what is it? Are we still making babies and so forth? But should we not, or should we? But then again, how does this go? What kind of a population control do we have? There was a time we have a big building there in Taguig, the Population Control Center. You had this already built during the time of Mrs. Imelda Romualdez Marcos, and she had even Bishop Gaviola heading the population center anyway. So we still have to look into that more carefully. And also, as far as the debate now going on in the United States of America regarding abortion and so forth, we still are a Catholic country. We still have Christian principles. And I believe that life for us actually is more sacred than all of these pills and all of these contraceptives, etc., and all of this, and abortion, abortion pills and so forth. And then we have regional economic cooperation. We are moving on to hopefully the regionally, that we could be now broken down. We could be not broken down, but we could now be divided, not even divided. We could now have the installation of regions, so that this is preparatory to the federal system of government, where you have certain provinces in one region as self-sufficient and autonomous from the central government in Manila. They will decide on their own. They will have use of their own taxes, etc., and all. And the planning system, of course, which we already have installed, the provincial and regional development boards, but we now should have regional, likewise, not just boards, but administrative arms that could be able to bring development and progress to the regions of the country. 15, 16, 17 of them. Tourism is another aspect which also needs a lot of attention. Trade and exports, and of course several others. Oh my goodness, my list is long and quite exacting. But all of this that I have mentioned are all really part of whether the candidate that is presenting himself or herself to us today have any of this in mind and would talk about it. We're hoping that there could be what they know of what has been called as a presidential presentation by our television and radio networks, and how else this will be done through social networking, so that this will not just be a presidential presentation, but a presidential debate, the way it was done in the past, where you have several candidates together. And so we could compare what this candidate has to say regarding a certain matter which is of importance to the people. And I've just mentioned the long list. How many is this? About 34 of them. 34 of these priorities. These are just priorities. We're not even talking about the secondaries of this, but the priorities which the candidates should have already within themselves when they present themselves to the people. So not just yung mga advertisement na ako para sa tao, akong sasagot dito at walang yung mga barko ng mga China paalisin, etc. All of this nice sounding statements, but are they really getting into the heart of the matter? Okay, so I have very little time left, and before I go into other things, I would just like to mention how important this day is. We try to remember what it was in the Philippine times of our revolution and the exemplary lives that these people have given for us to be truly independent and away from colonial rule. Although we are still colonized after that, we also had our freedom granted to us in 1946 by the Americans. Now, are we truly free? Whenever we speak of the freedom, justice, and democracy that is already part of our inheritance from the United States of America, the Declaration of Independence practically almost copied the way we had our first Philippine Constitution. But are we really free now, as far as many of these aspects that need us to be unshackled from our own selves, from our failures, from our misgivings, from the anger, the hatred, the greediness, the corruption, and all of these bad elements that still infiltrate the world of politics. That is where I am searching for heroes. That abomination that we have today, hopefully there we could find a God. A God in the sense that of the Greeks and the Romans, not a God as perfect as Almighty God, but somebody with the qualities, the ideals, and the embodiment of the dreams and the aspirations of the Filipino people. That is what we're looking for. And so we have so many things in mind as far as our candidates are concerned. I go back to Andres Bonifacio. And this, I'm extracting some of the lines that I have written myself about the Philippine Revolution. And this is what he said at the time, through my words or through the words of his beloved Lacandini. And this is the song of Lacandini, precisely. Patriots, I call on all who answer to the title of this name. In the horrors of my voice, you shall find your names, receiving in your hearts the anger of my love as I address the curse of darkness. Savage beasts who have undressed the honor every life enshrines in this vast sea of humankind's adventure. Whereupon, by power's madness, the blast of guns blasphemed the blessed invocations we have repeatedly recited to silence our ravaged skins. I have no shame to bare my flesh to rip the clothing that conceals my chest and expose the innards of my pain as I touch street by street, river by river, city by city, to the narrowest channels and hovels, the caves, the open fields, and shrouded woodlands. I touch them all, dying of my own dying, my hand on the blade. Be not content to step into the rhythm of the march as it crosses your path, nor with your cries grow hoarse, nor with your feet nor fists protest, but with lightning and thunder come, with fire and stone and volcanic fury come. So, patriots, I call on all who answer to the honor of the name. Come with the purity of the sacrifice and be the nourishment of our freedom, the food of our justice, the offering to our humanity. I call on all who answer to the honor of the name, patriots. So perhaps if each and every one of us can answer to that name the way Andres Bonifacio was quoted in my poem, then we can have the ideal government that we all aspire for 180 days or 200 days from today. So I'd like to close our program with a prayer, as we always do. We have just a couple of minutes to go, but I will read the prayer first before I start going to those who have joined us. So, dear God, walk with us through this season of the pandemic with a new variant actually hovering like an albatross over us. Open our hearts to your guidance, O Lord, and give us the strength to share your love with others through this time of uncertainty. May we look at each day as a celebration of your greatness, and please make us ready to receive your merciful healing and love. For thine is the power, the kingdom, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. So with that, before we close, let me see some of those who have joined us for this program. As I've said, we are now live on YouTube and Facebook, but you could watch us at any time. KDP channel, subscribe and share. Wilfredo Piñano, good afternoon, and good afternoon to you. Terry Campbell Magbiro, good afternoon, watching from Caloocan City. I cannot read your name. Kyrie, Ru, hello, Ma'am Rita, I'm watching from Sapporo, it's written in Japanese, Sapporo, Hokkaido, Japan, and Bonifacio Day. At maalala po ang maging katipunero ni Ka Andres. Yes, indeed. Banay Channel, BBC. Ay may live na po talaga kayo na napapanood ko. Good evening po. Yes. Josefina Alob Antonio, magandang hapon po. David Dwight Peñano, God bless you and God and all the best always. Dolia Pagarpar, ma'am, totoo talaga yan. Totoo talaga yaman ni Marcos. Oh my goodness. Speaking of all the wealth of Marcos and all of the other items as far as Ferdinand Marcos is concerned, I've talked about it for years. You can just go to YouTube again. KDP channel, you can find it all there. Zenia Arcilia, good afternoon, ma'am, listening from Hong Kong. Oh yes, be careful now. Your borders are closed, but also be careful. God bless po, and to all the viewers here. Laila Burakova, I love watching you, Madam Rita, and I love listening to you, your story, and to all of you also. I love having your names here greeting us. Lani Online TV, watching from Australia. Again, one of those countries that is listed also to be careful with this new variant, Omicron, as it is called. Ricky Dude 2001, watching from Singapore, always listening to you. Thank you very much. Kusina ni Pops, watching from Singapore. Yes, I also watched your Kusina ni Pops from Singapore. Robert Segovia, yes, we love Marcos, ma'am. Oh, thank you. And as I've said, you could read all about him in some of my past episodes. Laila Burakova, my late grandpa, is my hero because he fought during World War II. Indeed, we salute you and salute your family and your grandfather. He died fighting to protect our country. All of our soldiers are heroes in many ways and without measure. Patrick Garcia, hello, Ma'am Rita. I'm a fan. Oh, thank you very much. From Dr. Rizal to Marcos, may alteration ba sa history? History stands the way, as they say, the victors write them, but history will always be about the truth. All that you say as far as history is concerned should be the truth, but there are certain truths that cannot be said. Republic of Korea South is 24. Oh, 24. Oh my goodness. I said only 8. 24 na pala from the time we started the nuclear plant. Kasabay natin ang South Korea and see the progress of South Korea. Ngayon 24 na yung kanilang nuclear plant. Tayo, isa pa lang, hindi pa napapaandar. Thank you very much, Ver. And 4 are also under construction. This is their source from their IEA. This is their Atomic Energy Research Power Reactor Information System. Can you imagine that? Nag-umpisa ito when we had that, merong itlog dyan sa, I'm sorry, that big structure that looked like an egg sa may papasok sa UP. Even at the time, President Marcos already thought of the atomic energy, even assigned, what's his name, Siazon to be our ambassador for that atomic energy, and eventually the translator of many of our agreements with Japan, and became ambassador and secretary of Foreign Affairs eventually. Yes, that was Siazon at the time. But if you recall, that already was the beginning of the nuclear plant that we already installed at the time. Wow, 24 na sa South Korea. Kasabay natin yan during the time of President Marcos. Anyway, thank you to all of you who have joined us. I'm 1 minute past the time. This has been your hour, and I'm Rita Gadi.